Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. Zai's heart pounded as he stood on the stone steps of the Magic Academy, gazing out at the vast courtyard filled with students. The air hummed with excitement. The new course had begun, and it wasn't just any course. It was the most anticipated one of the year, the contract of the divine beast. Every student was required to form a magical bond with a divine beast, enhancing their magical abilities and advancing their standing in the academy. Zao, however, felt a pit of anxiety tightening in his stomach. Most of his classmates had already been matched with their beasts, griffins, phoenixes, water serpents, and other magnificent creatures. But Samazo, he had yet to find a partner. For weeks, he'd wandered through the enchanted forests surrounding the academy, hoping to find some creature that would choose him.
But nothing.
He wasn't exceptional, not like the others. His fire magic was weak, and while his family had some magical heritage, it wasn't nearly as illustrious as the families of his classmates. The pressure weighed heavy on him. He feared that without a contract, he'd be cast aside, forgotten in the shadows of the academy's stars. His thoughts were interrupted by the booming voice of Professor Mii, who stood at the front of the courtyard, her black robes fluttering in the breeze. "Students," she called today, "marks the final opportunity for those of you without partners to secure a contract. For those who succeed, your training will intensify. For those who fail." Her voice trailed off ominously, and the unspoken threat hung in the air. Darcel swallowed hard and looked around. Liu Kang, one of the top students, was sneering in his direction. Sui's contract with a magnificent thunder griffin had already made him the talk of the academy, and his disdain for Zato had only grown. "Good luck," Varasalu said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I'm sure there's a rat out there somewhere just waiting for you." Ignoring Liu's taunts, Zato clenched his fists and turned toward the forest. This was his last chance. He had to try. The enchanted forest loomed before him, the tall trees swaying gently as though whispering secrets to each other. Cerezo stepped cautiously onto the dirt path, his heart thudding in rhythm with the crunch of leaves underfoot. The magic here was palpable, filling the air like static before a storm. Hours passed, and the deeper he went, the more doubt gnawed at his mind. Every creature he encountered seemed to vanish before he could even approach. He was beginning to believe Liu Kang might be right. He was destined to bond with nothing more than a rat. Just as he was about to give up, a flicker of light caught his eye. It wasn't the typical glow of magical fireflies that filled the forest. This light was different, a soft blue that pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. Curiosity sparked, and Zelado pushed through a thicket of dense bushes, emerging into a small clearing. There, nestled in the center of a ring of ancient stones, was a large, cracked egg. The shell shimmered with the same blue light, pulsating as if alive. Zelado's breath caught. He could feel the power radiating from it. This was no ordinary egg. His hand trembled as he reached out toward it. The moment his fingers brushed the shell, a surge of energy shot through him. He gasped, stumbling backward, but his hand remained glued to the egg as though drawn by some invisible force. His surroundings blurred, and a high-pitched ringing filled his ear. The power within the egg seemed to awaken, responding to his touch. Suddenly, the egg cracked. Saleo's eyes widened as pieces of the shell began to fall away, revealing a creature within a small dragon-like figure, curled tightly in a ball. Its scales shimmered a deep azure, and tiny wings lay folded against its back. It stirred, blinking up at him with eyes that glowed with an ancient, untold wisdom. Before Fantessa could react, the creature spoke not with words, but with a voice that echoed in his mind. "I am Azaelam, last of the dragon Ken. By fate or chance, our bond is sealed." Celeso staggered backward, his mind reeling. Dragons were supposed to be extinct, wiped out centuries ago, yet here in front of him was a living descendant. Before he could process the enormity of what had just happened, the dragon Axio stood on shaky legs and stretched her wings, testing the air. Sarcel felt a rush of warmth flood his body as the contract solidified, tying their magic together. It was as though a door had opened inside him, allowing an immense flow of energy to surge through. His fire magic flared stronger than ever before, its flames now tinged with blue. The ground beneath him trembled. His bond with Exiolion had awakened something deep in the earth. The ancient stones surrounding the clearing began to glow, and Zala could feel the eyes of the forest upon him. He had no idea what he had just unlocked, But one thing was certain, this contract would change everything. C'est oui. Infirmary, his head pounding as though he'd been struck by a sledgehammer. Groaning, he sat up, clutching his temple. The events in the forest came rushing back, but it all felt like a dream. A dragon. Had he really just made a contract with a dragon? Well, you've certainly caused quite the stir, a voice said from the doorway. Sorashio turned to see Professor Mie, standing there, her sharp eyes fixed on him. Behind her, peeking out timidly, was Usanko Lan. She appeared smaller now, less fearsome than when Zafiro had first seen her in the forest. But the aura of ancient power still clung to her like a shroud. You mean... Professor Minai held up a hand, silencing him. You didn't tell me to bond with a legendary dragon descendant? Quite the accident, don't you think? Saraso opened his mouth to respond, but he couldn't find the word. What could he say? He hadn't even known what he was touching until it was too late. Professor Mine sighed, stepping closer. This is unprecedented, Zaisala. The High Magus Council will want answers. Dragons haven't been seen for centuries. And now you've formed a contract with one. Do you understand the gravity of this situation? Basio nodded slowly. What happens now? Professor Mia's expression softened slightly now. We figure out what to do with you and exhale length. But be warned, Sardo, this bond makes you a target. There are those who would do anything to control the power of the dragon cat. Frolio's stomach churned. The reality of the situation was sinking in fast. He wasn't just an ordinary student anymore. His bond with Exagolayan had thrust him into the center of something far greater than he could have ever imagined. As the days passed, rumors about Zahaliovir's contracts spread like wildfire through the academy. Some students whispered in awe while others eyed him with suspicion, particularly Liu Kan. The sneers and snide remarks became more frequent, but Sairo tried to ignore them, focusing instead on understanding his newfound power. Eximilian stayed by his side, though she remained quiet and reserved, watching the world around her with wide, curious eyes. Despite her dragon heritage, there was an innocence to her, as though she was seeing the human world for the first time. One afternoon, Zoretto and Juxalman stood in the academy courtyard, practicing their magic. Zoretto had always struggled with fire spells, but now with Exhale Land shells, influenced the flames leapt from his fingertips effortlessly. The once weak embers now roared into intense blue-tinted flames that danced and flickered in the air. Ixiolean watched with fascination. You are stronger than you know, Zahalo. Our bond has awakened your potential. Sarno exhaled his breath, ragged from the exertion. I can feel it. ... It's overwhelming. I don't know how to control it. Yusang Stalolan stepped closer, her eyes glowing with an inner light. Control will come with time. For now, trust in our connection. I will guide you. Their bond was unlike anything Basado had ever experienced. He could feel her thoughts, her emotions, as though they were intertwined in a way that transcended words. It was comforting, yet terrifying. Their training was interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. Sayo turned to see Luke walking toward them, flanked by two other students. His expression was cold, calculating. Well, Liu said, his voice smooth but laced with malice. Practicing your new tricks. Zalo, or should I say Dragon Master? Suffin stiffened, feeling the tension in the air. Exiolan moved behind him, her small form tensing as she sensed the hostility. What do you want? Lojane Thalo asked, his voice steady despite the unease creeping up his spine. How do you smile? Didn't he reach his eyes? I am curious, how does it feel to wield the power of a beast that should have stayed dead? Salato's fists clenched, but before he could respond, Lu continued, his tone dropping dangerously low. You don't deserve that power. Basao, you Risao ways have been. Zofa's heart raced, but Ixegolan's voice echoed in his mind, calm and reassuring. Do not be provoked. He seeks to destabilize you. Taking a deep breath, Zario met Leah's gaze. This power isn't about who deserves it, though. It's all about responsibility. Kalas Merk faded, his eyes narrowing. Well, see how long that power lasts. Without another word, Liu turned and walked away, leaving Zasov standing in the courtyard, his heart pounding. He knew this was just the beginning. The bond with Exile Lan had set off a chain reaction, and there were forces at play that he had yet to understand. The next day, Professor Mi-ai summoned Sao to her office. The room was dimly lit, lined with shelves full of ancient scrolls and tomes that seemed to pulse with their own magic. "Sit," she said, motioning to a chair in front of her desk. Sato did as he was told, feeling the weight of her gaze on him. "I've been doing some research, Professor Mi," began, her voice low, about dragons specifically, about Exolan settle lineage. Zora leaned forward, curiosity piqued. "What did you find?" "Professor Mi," I pulled out an old dusty book and placed it on the desk between them. "This text dates back centuries, to the time when dragons still roamed the earth. According to legend, the dragons disappeared after a great calamity, one that they themselves caused." "What kind of calamity?" "The details are scarce, but it seems the dragons attempted to harness a powerful form of magic that backfired, nearly destroying them all. The few that survived went into hiding, sealing themselves away from the world." She paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. Isako Lan is likely one of those survivors, but there is something else, the prophecy. Tosielsa's blood ran cold. "Prophecy." Professor Mi-ai nodded. "It said that a dragon king would one day return, bonded with a human, to restore balance to the magical world. With that bond comes great danger. If Isiolanis' power is not controlled, it could bring about another calamity." Zorfinio's mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. The bond with Exiolan, the dragon, ceased appearance, the prophecy, it was too much to take in. "But what am I supposed to do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Professor Mi-ai's gaze softened. "You must learn to control the power you've been given. And you must protect Exolan at all costs. There are those who would seek to use her for their own gain." Sora swallowed hard, the weight of responsibility settling heavily on his shoulders. He glanced at Exolan, who stood quietly by his side, her wide eyes filled with trust. "I will," he said, his voice steady. "I'll protect her." But as he left Professor Mi-ai's office that day, Sasato couldn't shake the feeling that the path ahead was fraught with danger. The forces stirring in the shadows were growing stronger, and he knew that Liu Kang was just the beginning. The tension in the academy continued to grow as Okao and Exolan trained together. Every day, Sato could feel their bond deepening, their magic intertwining in ways he never thought possible. But with each new strength came new challenges. Exolan's power was immense, and controlling it required every ounce of focus. One evening, while practicing in the academy cell courtyard, Zasalmo heard a rustling in the bushes behind him. He spun around, his senses heightened, only to see a figure emerge from the shadows, Liu Kang. Zaleo's muscles tensed, and he instinctively stepped in front of Exolan, shielding her from view. Hadia's face was expressionless, but his eyes gleamed with cold malice. "Zulaho," he said, his voice low and menacing it. "Time we settled this." Before Otago could react, Guido raised his hand, and a bolt of dark energy shot toward him. Rosa barely had time to raise a shield, the impact knocking him off balance. "Ian, what are you doing?" Zaleo shouted, scrambling to his feet. Linus' grin widened, taking what should have been mine. Zorio barely had time to throw up a barrier before another surge of dark energy exploded from Leo's hand. The force sent a crackling ripple through the air, slamming into Zahade's hastily conjured shield. He gritted his teeth as the impact reverberated through his body, his legs buckling under the strain. "You've lost your mind," Luo Zato yelled, trying to push back the magic threatening to tear through his defenses. Exolan, sensing the growing danger, darted out from behind him, her form shimmering as her dragon essence flared. Her eyes glowed with a fierce light, and Zao could feel the power within her stirring like a rising storm. He sneered, his lips curling into a vicious smile. "You've always been weak, Zao, but now you're just a fool. You don't try and deserve that dragon sound." He raised both hands, summoning a swirling mass of dark magic that coiled around him like a living entity, hissing and writhing as it grew stronger. Desperate enough to tap into forbidden magic, the kind that was outlawed even in the darkest corners of the academy. Zolago had heard whispers of families who dabbled in ancient dragon hunting techniques passed down through generations, but he never imagined Liu would go this far. The realization hit him like a cold slap to the face. Liu wasn't just trying to prove a point. He wanted to sever the bond between Zahao and Exile Lan. He wanted to take that power for himself. Before Vahaso could react, Liu unleashed the full force of his magic. The dark tendrils shot toward Exile Lan, aiming to ensnare her. Suaso felt a surge of panic. He didn't have time to think, only to act. With a roar, he summoned all the magic he could muster, his flames erupting in a brilliant arc of blue fire that collided with Liu's spell mid-air. The courtyard lit up in a dazzling display of power, the clash of opposing forces sending shockwaves through the ground. Zofado's knees buckled under the strain, but he pushed forward, pouring every ounce of his strength into the flame. He could feel Exile Lan's energy flowing through him, their bond growing tighter with each passing moment. He was relentless. His eyes burned with hatred as he pressed forward, his magic dark and twisted, fueled by something far more sinister than just ambition. Saosav. Verda's exhaustion began to creep in. He wasn't sure how much longer he could hold on. Then, just as his strength began to falter, Exile Lan let out a piercing cry. Her small form began to shift, her scales glowing brighter and brighter until they were blinding. Fracilio could feel the raw, ancient magic pouring out of her, and he realized with a start that Exile Lan was no longer holding back. This was her true form, her true power. With a deafening roar, Exile Lan transformed her wings, unfurled, stretching wide as her body grew larger, her scales gleaming like polished sapphires under the moonlight. The sheer force of her presence sent a shockwave through the courtyard, and for the first time Liu hesitated. Exile Lan's eyes locked onto Liu, and Zasa could feel the fury radiating from her. She wasn't just protecting herself, she was protecting their bond. With a single powerful flap of her wings, she sent a gust of wind, hurtling toward Liu, knocking him off his feet and scattering his dark magic like ash in the breeze. Verazzo took the opportunity to press forward, channeling the last of his strength into a final searing blast of fire. The blue flames surged toward Liu, and before he could react, they enveloped him completely. There was a deafening crack as the dark magic surrounding Liu shattered, breaking apart like glass. He let out a choked cry, stumbling backward as the flames licked at his robe. For a moment, it looked like he might retaliate, but then the fight seemed to drain out of him. His hands fell to his sides and the dark magic dissipated into the night. Liu collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. Sofolo stood over him, panting heavily, the flame still flickering in his hand. Exile Lan landed beside him, her form shifting back to her smaller, more manageable size, though the power still radiated from her in waves. It's however, Luignosa said, his voice hoarse but steady. You can true control this power. It's not yours to take. Sala glared up at him, his face twisted in a mixture of fury and shame. You don't deserve it. He spat, his voice trembling. You were nothing, Trello. You always have been. Flino took a deep breath, forcing himself to remain calm. Maybe I am not the strongest, he said quietly. But this isn't about strength. It's all about trust. Exile Lan chose me, and I'll protect her with everything I have. Lee's gaze faltered, and for a brief moment, Sato thought he saw something flicker behind his eyes. Regret, perhaps, or maybe just exhaustion. But whatever it was, it faded just as quickly, leaving only cold resentment in its wake. Before Fanaso could say anything else, Professor Minai appeared in the courtyard, flanked by several other instructors. Her eyes took in the scene: Liu on the ground, his robe singed and tattered, and Zaso standing over him with Exile Lan by his side. She said nothing for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke, her voice sharp and commanding enough. Luchi, can you have broken the laws of this academy by using forbidden magic? You will be dealt with accordingly. Yo's face paled, but he said nothing. He simply stood, his shoulders slumped as the instructors led him away. Zalso watched him go, his heart heavy with a strange mix of relief and sorrow. He had won, but the cost felt higher than he had expected. Professor Mimi, I turned to Zahao, her gaze softening slightly. You handled yourself well, Zahao. But this is only the beginning. The bond you share with Exile is rare and powerful, and there will be others who will try to take it from you. Be prepared. Theo nodded, his exhaustion catching up with him all at once. I will, Professor. In the days that followed, the academy was abuzz with rumors about the battle in the courtyard. Some students looked at Zasaldu with newfound respect, while others eyed him with suspicion, as though they were waiting for him to lose control of the power he had gained. But Zahello didn't tell it. Let it bother him. He had something far more important to focus on: his bond with Exile. Every day, he and Exile trained together, learning more about each other, as abilities, and growing stronger as a team. It wasn't easy. See was Yuan. Za's power was vast, and there were times when it overwhelmed Sosao, leaving him drained and frustrated. But with every challenge they faced, their bond grew deeper, more resilient. One evening, as they sat together by the academy, Slake Exile spoke softly, her voice carrying a weight that Zaso had not heard before. So, I want to tell you about the dragons, about why we disappeared. Zofeso turned to her, surprised by the sudden seriousness in her tone. You do have to, he said gently, not if you're not ready. Lan shook her head. No, you deserve to know. We were once proud, powerful creatures, but we made a mistake. We thought we could control magic far beyond our understanding. It destroyed us, nearly wiped us out. The few of us who survived went into hiding, hoping that one day we could return, but that day never came. Until now. Araxo listened in silence, his heart aching for her. He had always thought of dragons as invincible, untouchable. But hearing Ixinolancha's story, he realized that they had been just as vulnerable as anyone else. I'm sorry, he said quietly, for what happened to your people. Satsuko Lan smiled sadly. It's not your fault. Vasal, but it is my responsibility, Matt. I am the last of my kind, and I must make sure that the same mistakes are never made again. Yu Leixiao nodded, understanding the weight of her words. They were no longer just partners. They were protectors, guardians of a legacy that had been lost to time. And with that legacy came great responsibility. As the sun set over the academy, casting a warm glow over the lake, Zasado felt a sense of peace wash over him. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain: he and Escalalan would face it together. And the final test of the year came sooner than expected. The High Magus Council had decided to oversee a series of trials to evaluate the students' progress, and Zalo knew that his performance would be under intense scrutiny. Injexio stood at the edge of the arena, their hearts pounding in sync. I am ready, Zao said,
his voice steady, despite the nerves gnawing at his inside.
Ixego glanced up at him, her eyes glowing with quiet confidence. So am I. The arena roared with anticipation as the trial began. Zasao stepped forward, his hands already crackling with flame. Across from him, a group of elite students stood, their own magical beasts at their sides, ready to fight. But the Sao wasn't too afraid, not anymore. With a fierce battle cry, he charged forward, flames surging from his fingertips, and Exado leaped into the air, wings unfurling in a magnificent display of power. Together, they fought with a precision and grace that left the crowd in awe. When the trial was over, Sasaso stood victorious, his chest heaving with exertion, but his heart filled with pride. He and Sheikh Salon had proven themselves not just to the academy, but to each other. As the crowd cheered, Zahao glanced down at Sheikh Salon, who looked up at him with a playful glint in her eyes. We did it, she said, her voice filled with joy. Zosile smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. Yeah, he said softly, we did. But as they left the arena hand in hand, Zasado couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was far from over. The world outside the academy was vast and full of dangers, and their bond, though strong, would be tested in ways they couldn't yet imagine. But whatever challenges lay ahead, Zorino knew one thing for sure. He and Izago Lan would face them together. And as long as they had each other, they could overcome anything.